The scythe sang through the wheat with the rhythm of centuries, each stroke echoing the countless harvests that had come before. Thomas Blackwood wiped the sweat from his brow and gazed across the golden fields that stretched toward the ancient stone circle at the village's heart. The grain stood tall and heavy, ready for the taking, but something in the air felt different this year. Perhaps it was the way the wind carried whispers through the stalks, or how the ravens gathered in numbers he'd never seen before. "Thomas!" His sister Mary's voice carried across the field, sharp with an urgency that made him straighten. She stood at the field's edge, her apron twisted in her hands, dark hair escaping from beneath her cap. "Father wants you at the cottage. Now." The walk back to their thatched cottage felt longer than usual. The village of Thornwick had always been small, perhaps 50 families tucked into the valley between rolling hills. But today it seemed to hold its breath. Smoke rose from chimneys in thin, nervous streams, and Thomas noticed how few children played in the lanes. Even the dogs seemed subdued, staying close to their master's heels. Inside the cottage, the air was thick with pipe smoke and tension. His father, Edmund Blackwood, sat at the worn oak table that had served 3 generations of their family. Across from him sat Father Benedict, the village priest, his usually ruddy face pale above his black cassock. Between them lay an ancient leather-bound ledger, its pages yellow with age. "Sit, boy," Edmund said without looking up. His weathered hands, scarred from decades of farm work, traced the faded ink on the page before him. "It's time you learned the truth about our harvest." Thomas took his place at the table, his mother placing a cup of ale before him with hands that trembled slightly. Margaret Blackwood had always been steady as stone, but today her green eyes held shadows he'd never seen. "Every village has its traditions," Father Benedict began, his voice carrying the weight of confession. "But Thornwick's reach back further than most, back to times when the old ways and the new faith learned to coexist." Edmund turned the ledger toward Thomas. The pages were filled with names, dates, and brief notations in various hands. Some entries were in Latin, others in Old English, and the oldest seemed to be in symbols Thomas couldn't decipher. "The harvest festival isn't just celebration, son," Edmund said. "It's obligation. Every 25 years, when the moon reaches its fullest during harvest time, we make an offering. Not of grain or cattle, but of blood. Human blood, freely given." Thomas's ale suddenly tasted of copper and fear. "What are you saying?" His mother moved to stand behind his father, her hand resting on Edmund's shoulder. "There's something beneath our fields, Thomas. Something old and hungry that was here long before the Romans, before the Saxons, before any of us. The stone circle isn't just decoration. It's a seal." Father Benedict leaned forward, his eyes intense. "In 1348, when the Black Death swept across England, it stopped at our valley's edge. In 1588, when Spanish ships prowled our coasts, they passed us by as if we didn't exist. During the Great War, not one of our boys died in France, though they fought in the bloodiest battles. There's a reason for that protection, Thomas." "The sleeper," Edmund whispered, the words seeming to chill the very air. "That's what the old records call it. Something that feeds on life itself, but has agreed to slumber if we provide what it needs. Once each generation, when the harvest moon rises full, we send down one of our own. Willing. That's the key. It must be willing." Thomas pushed back from the table, his chair scraping against the stone floor. "This is madness. You're talking about murder." "No," Father Benedict said firmly. "We're talking about sacrifice. About one life given so that hundreds might live. The volunteer is honored, remembered. Their name goes in the ledger, and their family is cared for always." Margaret knelt beside her son, taking his hands in hers. "Your grandfather, William Blackwood. He was chosen in 1900. I was just a baby then, but I remember the stories. How proud the village was of him. How peaceful the years that followed were." Thomas stared at the ledger, at the neat entries marking each quarter century. 1875, Sarah Mills, spinster, age 32. 1900, William Blackwood, farmer, age 45. 1925, David Thornton, blacksmith, age 28. The entries went back page after page, century after century. "Why are you telling me this now?" he asked, though part of him already knew. Because it's 1950, Edmund said quietly. The harvest moon rises full in 3 days, and we haven't chosen our offering yet. The village council meets tonight to decide. That evening, Thomas walked the old paths that wound between Thornwick's cottages. The harvest festival preparations continued around him, but he saw them now with different eyes. The corn dollies weren't just decoration, but symbols of sacrifice. The bonfire being built in the village square wasn't for celebration, but for ceremony. Even the Morris dancers practicing their steps seemed to move in patterns that spoke of older rituals. He found himself at the Crow and Anchor, the village's only public house. Inside, the usual crowd of farmers and laborers nursed their pints in unusual silence. Conversations died as he entered, and Thomas realized that everyone knew why he might be there. Thomas Blackwood. The voice belonged to Agnes Whitmore, the publican's wife, a woman whose family had ran the inn for 200 years. She was perhaps 50, with iron gray hair and eyes that had seen too much. Your father's told you then. Thomas nodded, taking a seat at the bar. Agnes poured him a pint without being asked, the foam settling slowly in the dim light. My great-grandfather was chosen in 1825, she said quietly. Samuel Whitmore. The family still tells the story, how he walked into the stone circle with his head high, singing hymns. How the earth itself seemed to welcome him. Did anyone ever try to refuse? Thomas asked. To break the tradition? Agnes's face darkened. Once, in 1575, a young man named Peter Godwin was chosen, but he fled to London the night before the ceremony. We found his body 3 days later in his boarding house, drained of every drop of blood. And that winter, she shuddered. That winter, half the village died of fever, and the crops failed for 3 years running. The sleeper doesn't forget broken promises. Thomas spent the rest of the evening listening to stories. How in 1700, Elizabeth Hartwell had volunteered when her husband was chosen, saying she'd lived her life fully and wanted him to see their children grow. How in 1775, Marcus Stone had drawn the lot gladly, claiming he'd always known it would be his destiny. Each tale was told with reverence, even pride, but Thomas heard the underlying current of terror that kept the tradition alive. The village council met in the church, 12 men and women who represented Thornwick's oldest families. Thomas sat in the back pew as they debated in hushed voices, their words echoing in the stone sanctuary where his ancestors had worshipped for generations. The Hartwell family has no eligible members this generation, said John Miller, whose own grandfather had been chosen in 1875. Both sons married outside the village, and the daughter moved to London. The Thorntons have young William, but he's only 17, added Sarah Bramble, the schoolmistress. The records suggest it should be someone of full maturity. Father Benedict stood at the altar, the ancient ledger open before him. The choice need not be random, he said carefully. Volunteers have always been accepted, even preferred. The sleeper feeds not just on blood, but on willingness, on the free offering of life. All eyes turned toward Thomas. He felt the weight of centuries pressing down upon him, the expectations of the dead and the fears of the living. In that moment, he understood why his grandfather had walked into the stone circle with hymns on his lips. There was a strange kind of peace in surrender, in knowing that your death would mean something greater than yourself. I'll do it, he said, the words surprising him with their steadiness. I'll be the offering. The relief in the room was palpable, mixed with genuine sorrow. These people had known him since birth, had watched him grow from boy to man. His death would hurt them, but his willingness would save them all. The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparation. Thomas found himself treated with a deference that bordered on reverence. Villagers brought him gifts, his favorite foods, small tokens of remembrance, heartfelt letters thanking him for his sacrifice. Mary wept constantly, but even she seemed to understand the necessity of what was to come. On the day before the harvest moon, Father Benedict took Thomas aside for private conversation. They walked to the stone circle at the village's heart, 5 ancient monoliths arranged in a perfect pentagon. The stones were older than memory, carved with symbols that seemed to shift and writhe in the changing light. Are you certain about this, my son? The priest asked. There's no shame in fear, no sin in wanting to live. Thomas touched one of the stones, feeling the cold granite beneath his palm. The surface was smooth, worn by countless hands in countless years. What happens down there, Father? What is the sleeper exactly? Father Benedict was quiet for a long moment. The oldest records speak of something from the time before Christ, before Rome, before even the Druids knew this land. They call it the Thane of Shadows, a lord among its kind that once ruled over kingdoms of the dead. When the ice retreated and men first came to this valley, they found it already here, sleeping beneath the earth after some great battle fought in darkness. And it truly keeps us safe? Look around you, Thomas. Thornwick has never known famine, plague, or war. Our children grow healthy, our crops flourish, our animals prosper. We live in a bubble of peace while the world burns around us. That protection has a price. That night, Thomas barely slept. He stood at his window, watching the moon rise toward its fullest point. Tomorrow it would be complete, and his life would end. He thought of the girl he'd been courting, Emma Davies, from the next village over. She would never know why he'd stopped visiting, never understand why their future together had been cut short. But he also thought of the children playing in Thornwick's lanes, of the elderly villagers who'd lived longer than most, of the prosperity that blessed their small corner of England while rationing and hardship plagued the rest of the country. His death would purchase their continued peace. The harvest festival began at sunset. The entire village gathered in the square, dressed in their finest clothes, and carrying torches that turned the gathering dusk into dancing gold. Musicians played traditional airs on fiddle and pipe, and the Morris dancers performed their ancient steps. But beneath the celebration, Thomas sensed the underlying tension, the knowledge of what was to come. At the stroke of midnight, the revelry stopped. The torches were extinguished, save for one, carried by Father Benedict as he led the procession toward the stone circle. Thomas walked beside him, wearing a simple white robe that the village women had sewn for him. Behind them came the entire population of Thornwick, moving in silent formation through the moonlit fields. The stone circle waited, stark and imposing against the star-filled sky. The harvest moon hung directly overhead, so bright it cast sharp shadows across the ancient ground. Thomas could feel something stirring beneath his feet, something vast and hungry beginning to wake. "Thomas Blackwood," Father Benedict intoned, his voice carrying across the silent crowd. "Do you come here of your own free will, to offer your life for the protection of this village and its people?" "I do," Thomas replied, surprised by the strength in his own voice. "Do you make this sacrifice without coercion, understanding fully what it means?" "I do." The priest placed his hands on Thomas's shoulders. "Then may God forgive us all, and may your sacrifice be remembered with honor." The earth within the stone circle began to crack, soil falling away to reveal stone steps leading down into darkness. The opening was perfectly round, just wide enough for one person, and from its depths came a sound like breathing, slow and deep and ancient. Thomas approached the opening and looked down. The steps seemed to descend forever, disappearing into a blackness that swallowed the moonlight whole. From below came a whisper that might have been wind, or might have been voices, speaking in languages that predated human memory. He turned back to face the villagers one last time. His parents stood in the front row, their faces streaked with tears but their eyes proud. Mary clutched their mother's hand, while Father Benedict held the ancient ledger ready to record this night's sacrifice. "Thank you," Thomas said simply. "All of you, for everything." Then he descended into the earth. The steps were carved from the same stone as the circle above, worn smooth by the passage of centuries. As Thomas walked deeper, the opening above became a distant star, then vanished entirely. The darkness was complete, but somehow he could still see, as if the stone itself gave off a faint phosphorescence. The stairway spiraled downward for what felt like hours, though time seemed meaningless in this place between worlds. The walls began to change as he descended, the rough-hewn stone giving way to something that looked almost organic. Strange formations jutted from the surfaces like fossilized bones, and the air grew thick with the scent of deep earth and older things. Finally, the stairway opened into a vast chamber that defied earthly architecture. The ceiling soared upward beyond sight, supported by pillars that seemed to grow from the living rock like petrified trees. Phosphorescent veins ran through the stone walls, pulsing with a rhythm that matched a heartbeat, casting everything in an eerie blue-green glow. At the chamber's center, on a raised dais of black stone, lay the sleeper. Thomas had tried to prepare himself for this moment, but nothing could have readied him for the reality. The creature was enormous, perhaps 9 feet in length, its form simultaneously human and utterly alien. Its skin was the color of ancient parchment, stretched taut over a frame that suggested both terrible strength and impossible age. Dark veins traced intricate patterns across its body, like a living map of forgotten rivers, pulsing with the same rhythm as the walls around them. Its face was beautiful in the way that death could be beautiful, with sharp cheekbones and lips that held the faintest suggestion of a smile. Silver hair cascaded from its skull like liquid moonlight, pooling on the stone around its resting place. But it was the hands that truly marked it as something other than human. The fingers were too long, ending in nails that looked more like claws, and the palms bore scars and patterns that hurt to look at directly. Even in sleep, the creature radiated power. The very air around it seemed to thicken, and Thomas felt his own life force responding to its presence like iron filings drawn to a magnet. As he approached, those terrible eyes opened. They were the color of deep winter, pale blue shot through with silver and ancient beyond measure. They fixed on Thomas with an intensity that seemed to pierce through flesh and bone to examine his very soul. When the sleeper spoke, its voice resonated not just in the air but inside Thomas's mind, a sound like wind through empty halls. Another comes to feed the compact. The words carried the weight of eons, each syllable measured and deliberate. You walk willingly into darkness, child of the upper world. I come freely, Thomas managed, his voice small in the vast chamber, as my grandfather did, and his grandfather before him. The sleeper's lips curved in what might have been approval. Yes, I remember the Blackwood blood. It runs sweet with courage and bitter with sorrow. Your grandfather sang as he died. Old hymns to his new god. The creature's laughter was like the sound of breaking glass, as if prayers could change what he was or what I am. Thomas felt his courage wavering in the presence of such ancient malevolence, but he forced himself to stand straighter. What are you? Father Benedict said you were old, but... Old? The sleeper sat up slowly, its movements fluid despite its size. I walked this earth when your kind still cowered in caves and painted crude pictures on stone walls. I ruled over cities whose names are lost to time, commanded armies of the dead across battlefields that exist now only in nightmares. The creature rose to its full height, towering over Thomas like a dark angel. I am the Thane of Shadows, Lord of the 13th House, Herald of the Crimson Court. I have fed on the blood of kings and the dreams of saints. I have seen empires rise and fall like wheat before the scythe. Thomas felt his knees growing weak, but the sleeper raised one clawed hand in a gesture that was almost gentle. But that was long ago, before the great binding, before the compact your ancestors made with mine. Now I am content to sleep, to dream of darker days, and to accept a tribute your people offer. One life every 25 years, freely given, to purchase peace for your small corner of existence. And in return, you protect us? Protection? The sleeper's laughter echoed through the chamber. Child, you understand so little. I do not protect you. I simply ignore you. My very presence here bends the world around this place, creates a pocket of stability in the chaos of mortal existence. Plagues pass you by because disease fears to enter my domain. Armies turn away because their horses sense my slumber and refuse to proceed. Your crops grow tall because the earth itself dares not displease me. The creature leaned closer, its breath cold against Thomas's face. You are not under my protection, little mortal. You exist in my shadow, and shadows are safe places only so long as the sun does not move. Thomas felt the full weight of what he was facing, the terrible reality behind centuries of village folklore. This was no benevolent guardian accepting tribute, but a predator so powerful that its mere presence warped the natural order. The protection Thornwick enjoyed was not a gift, but a side effect, no more meaningful to the sleeper than the way a mountain's shadow shields travelers from rain. Now, the creature said, extending one pale hand toward him, come, complete the bargain and let me return to my dreams. I grow weary of consciousness. Thomas stepped forward, his heart hammering against his ribs. The sleeper's hand closed around his wrist with surprising warmth, and he felt his life beginning to drain away like water from a broken vessel. But the process was not violent or painful. Instead, it felt almost peaceful, like sinking into a warm bath after a long day's work. As his strength faded, Thomas found himself remembering moments from his life with startling clarity. Summer afternoons in the wheat fields, his mother's laughter, Mary's smile, the taste of ale at the Crow and Anchor. Each memory seemed to glow briefly before dissolving, as if the sleeper was examining them before consuming them along with his blood. Interesting, the creature murmured. Your thoughts carry the flavor of contentment. Most who come to me are driven by duty or fear, but you chose this path with genuine peace in your heart." Thomas tried to speak, but found he no longer had the strength. His vision was fading, the phosphorescent chamber growing dim around the edges. "Sleep now," the sleeper whispered, its voice growing distant. "Sleep, and know that your sacrifice has meaning, even if that meaning is smaller than you believed." As darkness claimed him, Thomas felt a strange sensation, as if he was falling not downward but sideways, into a place that existed outside of time and space. His last thought was of Emma Davis, and he hoped she would find happiness with someone else, someone who could grow old beside her under skies that had never known shadow. The sleeper released the empty vessel that had been Thomas Blackwood, letting it crumble to dust on the chamber floor. With a sound like contentment, the ancient creature settled back onto its stone dais, already beginning to return to the deep slumber that would last another 25 years. Above, in the stone circle, the earth closed seamlessly over the opening as if it had never been disturbed. Father Benedict wrote carefully in the ledger, 1950, Thomas Blackwood, farmer, age 25. Willing sacrifice, freely given. His hand trembled slightly as he formed the letters, and a tear fell onto the page beside Thomas's name. The villagers filed silently back to their homes through the pre-dawn darkness, each carrying the weight of what they had witnessed. Some wept openly, while others maintained the stoic dignity that had seen their ancestors through centuries of such nights. All of them understood that they were complicit in murder, but all of them also understood that the alternative was unthinkable. The sun rose on Thornwick, as it had for 1,000 mornings before, painting the wheat fields gold and setting the church bells ringing across the valley. The harvest festival would continue today, but the shadow of the previous night's events would linger in every smile, every song, every prayer offered in the village church. Thomas Blackwood was gone, his life traded for 25 years of peace. And beneath the fields where he had once worked, something ancient and terrible settled into dreams of darker days, sated for now but never satisfied, waiting for the next harvest moon to rise full and bright above the stone circle, where the living made their bargains with the dead.